Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave. We have a very special guest today. George Zarkadakis leads the future of work at Willis Towers Watson in Great Britain, a global risk and human capital consulting firm. He is the author of In Our Own Image, The History and Future of Artificial Intelligence, as well as other books. He's written extensively on science and technology for publications, including Eon and Wired. He's currently a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Geotech Center. George, welcome to Community and Technology.
Thank you so much, Stu, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. I know Dave has a bunch of questions, but something that just jumped out at me. I was looking at a review of your book, Cyber Republic, Reinventing Democracy in the Age of Intelligent Machines. And I was just kind of fascinated about your take on AI and big data and how that could positively impact liberal democracies, make them more inclusive and equitable. Could you summarize a little bit about what that thesis is?
Absolutely. So I think there is clearly a huge debate about the opposite argument, right? So, which is in fact true, obviously, right? What AI has been doing so far is being negatively impacting our democracy. It creates echo chambers on social media, fuels rage and polarization. It creates winners and losers in a digital economy that grows at an exponential rate, leaving behind millions and millions of people. So there's a lot of negative so-called externalities or effects of AI on our society. So my purpose in writing this book was to explore what can we do about that. We can perhaps take a defensive position and say AI is, it's a monster that we need to tame, or perhaps, at least that's what I'm saying in the book, is maybe we should rethink this technology. And by rethinking it, make it work for the many and not just for the few. By rethinking it, make it work so that societies come closer together rather than being torn apart. And I think there's clearly opportunities we can do that. And those are the things and the opportunities and the possibilities, if you like, Stu, that I'm looking up to and discussing in the book.
Mm-hmm. I guess the challenge is that, the same folks that have all the built-in biases that we see in AI and all the technology systems how do we reverse that? I mean, how do you change
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah, that is the key question. So maybe just add a little context to what got us to the place we're today, right? And I think that'll help us then think through what do we need to change. Yeah. So in summary, AI has a long history. It's about 60 years old, but really what happened over the 10 years, certain scientific advances that took place in that field created, the AI that we know today. Systems that, for example, can understand human voice, can understand writing, can, identify people simply by looking at their faces and so forth and so on. Now, when that started happening about 10 years ago, so let's say, the companies that had the money and the power to quickly adapt this technology to their business models were, in fact, the companies that had a lot of data, and they were, in fact, advertising companies like, Facebook and other companies like that. So they took this technology and purposed it around their business model, okay, which is all about personalized, understanding understanding you and me, and pushing content that will keep us engaged with that content. And usually what that means is content that is tuned to our biases. For example, if I like fishing, it'll be all about fishing. If I'm a right-wing guy, it's all about confirming my right-wing biases. If I'm left-wing, and so forth and so on. And that's what got us to where we are here today, right? Now, this technology is rather neutral, if you like. It doesn't take sides. It just needs people to start using it in a different way. So, for instance, in the book, I'm imagining cooperatives, let's say, of citizens, okay, or workers or trade unions, taking up AI and using it for social purposes. rather than taking AI and using it, for the purposes that already exist. So it's who's using it. The good news is that artificial intelligence has been quite democratized from the point of view that you don't need to be an expert in AI or a high sort of very super talented data scientist to use it. Everybody can use it. It's becoming much easier now for people to use it. I mean, obviously you need to bring together some software developers, but it's not the hard sort of science that used to be 10 years ago. So people have the tools now to really start using AI for other purposes and other goals. And I think that's an opportunity that has to be seized, as I said, by communities, by trade unions, by cooperatives and other social actors in society.
Okay, well, that's certainly something that we can hope for. One of the notions that you talk about, and I think it's a corollary to what you're saying, is you talk about something called the intelligent machine age, and I guess that's where we are right now. How would you describe that?
So, the intelligent machines are the machines we already know. Only now they have the capability to take autonomous decisions. Let's put it this way, right? If I was to give you a very sort of succinct definition of what really changed now, is this: the autonomy of systems to take their own decisions, which means they don't need a human to be in the loop, to be controlling what the machine does, right? So the car can go by itself, doesn't need the driver, okay? Mm-hmm. We can automate stuff like that now. And that puts us in a very important tipping point when it comes to a sort of history, right? Because once you start automating things that people do, it has a number of impacts, right? There's obviously a very positive impact, meaning that we can be more productive and more efficient. We can produce things in a much better way. So there is wealth that is clearly going to be created by those machines, as it has happened in the past with previous industrial revolutions. But there's also negative impact on society, right? So the fact that less workers will be needed because the machines can do it on their own means that many people will be displaced. The jobs will be more insecure. So there will be a huge impact in society as well. So what do we do about that? Clearly, we want the upside of intelligent information because it can give us much more of what we have. It can help us solve important problems in healthcare and environment. There's a huge bounty there. But at the same time, we need to find ways where this huge bounty that's going to be created has to be distributed a little bit more equally, I would say, right? And there's a strong argument in favor of that, not just on a moral ground, which is clearly morally right, but there's also beyond the moral ground. There's an on economic grounds as well. You see, what fuels this industrial revolution, what feeds the intelligent machines with the intelligence is data, right? Is those intangible assets of data, and most of that data, not all of it, but most of that data, clearly, or very much, a great number of that data is produced by us, you, Dave, myself, and all the other people that are listening to the program, right? We create that data simply by existing in cyberspace through our interactions. Currently, that data is not giving us back any real value, any monetary value, if you like. We just, companies take those data for free and they create wealth. It's as if you imagine, car manufacturers sourcing all their raw materials for free and just building cars, and they sell cars, right? Imagine the profits they have. This is exactly what happens now with most of the internet companies, right? They take the raw materials more or less for free. Okay, that's why you see those huge capitalization value, you see, companies being extremely valuable with very small number of workers. So what I'm suggesting in the book is that if we want to have a more equitable digital economy in the 21st century, as we go through that tipping point and more wealth is created because of data and AI, we have to find ways where the data that we contribute into those algorithms, the value of that data somehow returns back to us. And in my book, I'm describing, for example, concepts like data trusts and data cooperatives and how we can govern those data cooperatives in a democratic way, and other mechanisms where we can make that a reality.
Dave, you want to chime in here, Dave?
Well, he opens up a lot of interesting ideas, and so that's what I wanted to throw at him. George, let me ask you first to look a little bit ahead. you're seeing some big changes in what the world is going to be like over the next 5 or 15 years. Why don't you describe some of the changes that are going to affect people that you've been analyzing?
So I think we are now at a point where there's two major changes, I would say, that together they will change our world in the next 15 years. One big change is the decoupling between the West and China. So at the geopolitical sphere, we see this decoupling of economies, and that sort of drags along technology as well. So for example, there's a different AI going to be developed in China, different AI in the West. There's going to be a different sort of standards for communications, 5G networks, etc., etc. So the big decoupling is an important driver of change.
Really, you really see that happening if the U.S. in particular and the Western governments don't insist on it? Because, for example, the industry is doing the 5G standards, all of 3GPP, working very much with the Qualcomms and Intels of the United States, working with Huawei and China Mobile, just fine at 3GPP, and it's only government interventions that's going to change that.
You're right. It will be
That's
government.
my background. I come out of telecom.
Absolutely.
I'm ready to go to 5G.
So thank you for that. So clearly the Chinese were first to establish the standards for the 5G networks, and you know they are the winners so far of that race. But I think many alarms have been raised across the Western world on what that means exactly, right? When you have systems run by chips and by equipment of countries that they can suck up your data without you knowing, have a kill switch that can destroy your infrastructure. There's huge security issues at play here, and I think personally, this is something of great concern. And governments now, it's not just the US, European governments as well, are insisting that we should have homegrown technology when it comes to such an important infrastructure as 5G. So that, however, is a manifestation of a more broader, if you like, antagonism kind of with China, which spans not just technology, but also, the political system of China, how China sees themselves in the broader sort of geopolitical arena, becoming more assertive and so on and so forth. So there's a great, and also has to do also with supply chains, something that clearly we lived through the COVID-19, where people couldn't source masks and raw materials for vaccines. So this is one big area. And the other big area is, the so-called fourth industrial revolution, the intelligent machines, the impact of intelligent machines, the data economy, how that impacts work, and how, by increasing wealth and income inequality, it really tears our societies apart, clearly, right? There are people now living in America, living in Europe, mostly in America, I'd say more than in Europe, because, we have a social welfare system in Europe that kind of like absorbs many of those shocks. But in America, the situation is much worse, I would say, for people, for example, who lose their job, right? Or they're on sort of contract work and don't know if they have a contract the next month, and they have to, sustain a family at the same time. It's really tough, right?
So let me throw you out the next question. Who are going to be the winners? Who are going to be the losers in what you see?
I think it's up to us. I mean, if we don't, and I say us, the people, the grassroots, I don't know, the citizens, okay? If we leave things to the hands of the politicians and the big corporations, they're going to, it's clear who's going to be the winner, it's going to be the loser. It's going to be a repetition of the same old story, right? But this time is going to be different in the sense that what I mentioned before, the sort of concept of exponential increase when it comes to the impact of technology. Exponential means that every year things double, right? If you look at the way, for example, intangible assets increase in value, right, as opposed to tangible assets, you will see, this exponential value, and that means a lot more people will be left behind. I mean, think of, Jeff Bezos going to space on July the 20th with his brother, right? Just having a 10-minute trip to increase their planetary awareness. I don't know. At the same time, you had millions and millions of people, not having jobs. So it's really shocking right now, what the future might look like, right? and therefore, what I'm saying is that we should take some control of our destiny here. And it is up to us, both in terms of organizing ourselves, and also, as I said before, using technology to better our lives. We can't wait for others to do it for us, right? We can do it our own. That's what I'm saying. So I don't think the government will solve anything, right? But I think people will solve many, many problems themselves.
And your answer, the question and the answer was looking at our society. But another question that's big is looking at how this works internationally. Who are the winners and losers? Now, let's keep China out of it for now.
Sure.
Not that China isn't a quarter of the world. But when I look at India and Africa, and I'm seeing the effect of these changes as profound, where do you see the international impacts? Who's the winner and who's the loser of the future you see internationally?
Sure. So let me first say that I don't see the economy as a zero-sum game. There's winners and losers. We can all be winners ultimately, right? If it becomes a zero-sum game, then we're in trouble, definitely, right? So we must avoid the zero-sum game.
Vasily Leontief won the Nobel Prize for looking at the structure of the economy. And in fact, economies change very slowly. The Western economies move at real change of 1% to 3% a year over the last 200 years, and that rate's been going down. So the economy overall is not changing its values very much. So there are winners and losers or something. And you can, that's true internationally.
To some extent they are. The debate about, whether it's, well, let me put it this way. I think that we can understand the economy using various metrics and various terms. There is also a debate around growth. What does that mean? Really, if you want to have a sustainable planet, for example, what does growth really mean? Can we have a sustainable economy without having growth? And maybe there is a way to do it. But going back to your question about what happens to the rest of the world, I had the opportunity. I don't know too much about the rest of the world, but I know a little bit about Africa because I have, very close friends of mine in West Africa, and I've traveled there quite a lot. And I understand, clearly some of the issues that Africa has, which are many, but it has, huge advantage, and it's the people, right? They're among the most entrepreneurial people in the world, very energetic, young people, very ambitious. And what is so cool about that is that they're much better educated now, definitely, many university degrees out there. And technology, they have technology, they understand technology, they're using technology, they're setting up startups. And the great thing about technology is that you don't have to, build from the ground up, you can leapfrog, right? You don't have to build all this infrastructure, you can leapfrog, right? And that's the great opportunity here for places like, countries around Africa and other countries to get themselves out of that economic trap that many of those countries have found themselves into for all kinds of reasons, but not because of technology, not so much. Has most to do with governance, I would say, rather than technology.
Why don't you go further into that? I know, for example, Kenya has a very energetic startup scene.
Yeah.
And
they're huge. Tanzania, Kenya, those countries are flying right now.
Give us some stories you've bumped into and things you've learned about what's happening in Africa, because most people over here don't realize how dynamic Africa has been.
Yeah, because I had to go myself. I was hanging out with African friends in London a long time, but I had to go to Africa myself to understand, how different the place is, right? And how it doesn't fit our stereotypes, essentially, right? And, I spend a lot of time in Lagos, Nigeria, okay? It's an amazing place, by the way. And I've met artists, I've met, entrepreneurs. They are, they're renovating fintech, for example, in a massive way, because one of the biggest problems that they got over there is banking, right? Many people are unbanked. They want to start a business, and it's a huge issue for them, right? How do you start a business if you can't have a bank account? Okay, I mean, giving the power, just this simple thing that we take for granted here. Most of us take for granted in the West. You go to the bank, you open a bank account, you start up a company, no problem. It's a huge issue in Africa, right? For most people to do that. That's a simple thing. They got the idea, they got the energy, they got the team together, and don't have a bank account. Okay, so there's a lot of innovation happening there with payment systems, with bank account. There's a lot of stuff happening now also with blockchain and crypto, especially with Sierra Leone. I'm mentioning a lot of Sierra Leone and what they do with digital identities and how they use blockchain, to ensure governance in contracts, right, in land rights and so on and so forth. Okay, so there's lots of things that this country is not. They're already doing it, right. In many ways, they're far ahead of the rest of us when it comes to innovation and using those technologies to really create more equity in society.
Stu, do you have any questions before the break?
That's fascinating to hear that, and encouraging for sure. We kind of think that we here in the West are the leaders in technology, and though we may be the leaders economically in terms of exploiting, clearly listening to you, George, we're not the leaders in terms of applications and innovative uses of technology. So that's very encouraging. I had a question. In one of your pieces, you talk about digital authoritarianism and safe cities and smart cities. Is that happening in Africa? Well, how is government and governance using or not using technology to either help lift up or control their societies? What do you see?
So I don't really know the answer to that question, Stu, to be honest with you. I'm not so well informed about what the state of smart city infrastructure is in Africa. I would expect perhaps countries like South Africa, which have more, have a better sort of infrastructure in the ground to move first into building that sort of infrastructure. And I wonder, what sort of systems they will adopt. Clearly China, going back to China, because China is a major supplier of equipment when it comes to smart cities, right? And technologies. China is already exporting around the world technology, for example, face recognition technology, okay? And now face recognition is all but banned in European Union, okay? There's legislation now going through European Parliament to ban face recognition, but it's not banned in other countries. So what I would say is that we are currently in a fluid state where some countries will go down the path of adopting more, if you like, authoritarian type of technologies that are more about controlling.
Oh, you mean like the US?
Sorry?
And Amazon. You mean like the US and Amazon? We've had shows.
Yeah. So in the US and not just in the US, in West, we have what is called, private surveillance, right? We have, private organizations, knowing everything that we do. And in other countries, they just have the government doing that, the state surveillance. So I dislike both extremely, extremely. And in my book, I'm suggesting how we can reclaim governance of our data at the city level and at national level, right? How we can actually do that in practical ways, and how, if we did it, in fact, it will be a bonus for innovation. Sorry, Dave, I didn't hear you.
Are you trying to put Amazon out of business? I mean, nobody has been more active putting surveillance cameras out there that, as it happens, are being very actively connected to the police department in California in particular. Are you saying there's something the matter with that? Or are you saying that there's some way citizens can change that?
Yes, I say that.
We're falling far behind here in the US, I know.
But it's things can change, right? I mean, we must believe in change and positive change. If we don't, then we might as well give up and, I don't know, take the next spaceship that Musk makes and go to Mars, maybe, right? Just bottle out of here. But I don't plan to go to Mars, Dave. No way. I'm going to stay here. Do the best I can. And going back to your, to what you talked about Amazon and whatnot, one of the problems that we have as societies because of companies like Amazon and others sort of sucking up all the data and using it for their own purposes, that impacts innovation. How does it do that? Because, you ask many startups where they have a great idea, they want to use AI to do something really cool. And there comes a point in their life cycle very early that they can't go any further because they don't have the data, right? The data is not there because the data is already sucked in by, the big tech in their own infrastructure, and they don't have data to train their algorithms and compete with those guys. So what happens in the end? Those guys buy them up, right? So one of the reasons why innovation in the West has stalled, and I would argue that it has, it clearly has. The only thing that we've got over the past few years is that the smartphone, and everybody's looking at it all the time. Our life has not improved in any significant ways because innovation has been stifled. One of the reasons is that, companies don't have the data to innovate on other stuff. So if we can find a way, and I'm suggesting this way in my book called The Data Trust, so our data can be pulled together in some kind of data trust, an intermediary, which is governed by ourselves, right? So we have representatives there with fiduciary responsibility to us. And those data intermediaries then broker our data, anonymized, completely secure, ethically, all that stuff, to companies. Then we can have a more level field for innovation as well. So it's a win-win for us, the citizens, the data provider, and a win-win for the economy overall, if we did that.
Mm.
And we're about to take a break. After the break, I know Stu is ready to start asking about one solution to some of these problems because he's been working on it, which is a universal basic income. So we'll be back in a few minutes. Stu?
Thank you, Dave. This is Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3, the voice of Harlem. Stu Reid, Dave Burstein, special guest, George Zarkadakis. We'll be right back after a brief musical break. Stay tuned. Okay, we're back. Community and Technology with Stu Reid, Dave Burstein, special guest, George Zarkadakis. Before the break, we were talking a bit about, I guess, what will be called, what you refer to, George, I think in your book as decentralized digital identity. And I think you also kind of talk about a way that as that digital identity is decentralized, that there's a way for folks to take control of it and for it to be used to fund universal or unconditional basic income. Can you kind of talk us through the logistics of how that might work? And you have to unmute yourself, George, sorry.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, Stu. So let me first explain what digital identity means, which is really straightforward. Every time we use a service, every time we use a Facebook account, or every time we log into some system, we create some kind of identity. We have a password, an ID, and we create a profile. So that's a digital identity, okay? And right now we have many of those digital identities. I don't know if you use 3 or 4 different social media platforms, you have 3 or 4 digital identities, right? Different from each of those services. And your data is very siloed, right? Your data sits on somebody else's infrastructure, that services infrastructure is very siloed, okay? And that's how the current web is built, okay? Now, not just me, but many other people are sort of trying to imagine what it would be like so that instead of having all those multiple digital identities controlled by others, you had your own digital identity, okay? And your data was not siloed, but it belonged to you, okay? So if I was Facebook, for example, okay, I would have to ask you to give me certain data from the data that you own, like, for example, your age, I don't know, whatever you want to give me, okay? And we can trade that data, and I can use that data to, you know, to give you some content and give you some ads. So Facebook could keep on working if you like, but it will be a completely different relationship, okay? Because you will own the data because we have just one identity, okay? And that's what decentralized digital identity means. Now, why does it have to be decentralized, okay? And what does that mean, all right? So you can have, so right now you have many centralized digital identities. Why centralized? Because Facebook centralizes the data, Twitter centralizes the data, and you have centralized digital identities, okay? And they do that for one reason, because they need to know that you are who you are, okay? So they need to verify that, you know, Stu Reid that's using Twitter is the Stu Reid that is you and not somebody else. And they're trying to do that in many ways, but centralizing your data there is the way to do it. Now, if we take that data away, the question is, who will verify me as George, for example? You know, if I go to Facebook and say, I'm George Zarkadakis, right? And I would like to give you some data in return for something. How does Facebook know that I am indeed George Zarkadakis, right? That's the question we want to solve. So one way of solving that, without putting another intermediary as a third party to tell, say, Facebook that I am who I am, we can do that in a decentralized way, which means building a system using blockchain, where the blockchain is just a fancy word for a piece of software that in fact verifies that I am who I say I am. So the blockchain, that piece of software, acts as a verifier that I am who I am, okay? And that creates trust between me and you if we want to transact. So that's the concept behind decentralized digital identity. And it's massive. It really is important because that completely changes the asymmetry of power that exists right now between us, who are the data producers, if you like, and we are individuals with very little power, and the big tech that are big organizations with trillions of dollars, you know, armies of lawyers, you know, huge power right now. Okay, it changes that power balance, and that is why it's so important. Okay, and that's the concept of decentralized digital identity that I'm discussing in the book.
Okay, so I get that, and that's a huge transformation. I don't know how we make that happen, but were we to make that happen, then how does the UBI fold into that?
Okay, so those are, by the way, the idea that I'm going to tell you now, and I'm discussing in the book, I'm putting it in practice now. So I'm working with a team to actually do it, create a prototype of what I'm discussing, so we can demonstrate it, you know, have some users use it, et cetera, and see how to make it work. Okay.
Okay.
But in the short version of this is like this. If we do have a decentralized digital identity, right, we can do that. Then we can have, let's say, a data repository. Think of it as a database, okay, or a data vault, or some kind of place in your computer or in the cloud where you can put all the data in, right? And that data can be whatever you want to think about. It can be your personal data, it can be your health data, it can be your credit data, it can be, I don't know, pictures, it can be whatever you like, whatever you want to consider as your own data. You can put it in that kind of database, right? And then you can say, you can connect your decentralized digital identity with that database. And by connecting those two things, so you need two things, right? So by connecting those two things, essentially what you're saying to the world is that this data is mine, okay? And because your digital identity is verified, everybody now knows that this data is yours. So you're an insured, essentially, data property rights, which right now you don't have, okay? All right? Okay, we can call them property rights. I'd like to call them property rights. It's a big debate whether we should have or should not. I think we should, but anyways, so that's what you do have. So it's like property rights, okay? And once you have property rights, then you can enter into all kinds of exchanges. You know, you're free to enter in those exchanges. So for example, you know, if a community where you live decides, okay, to use software and create a data intermediary and say, and everyone in Harlem, right, or everyone in Bronx or whatever, you know, if you guys want to offer your data into this thing called the data trust, okay, using your digital identity, using your data vault, and you just put this data into the data trust, and you come to agreement with the data trust, we will represent you in brokering that data to whoever wants to use it. So for instance, you know, you may decide that, you know, you have some interesting medical data, right? All this is going to be anonymized, by the way. I mean, nobody will be able to identify you. And very importantly, the digital identity that is decentralized is also non-identifiable, okay? So I don't need to know who you are. It's just important to know that the data that you have is yours. That's all I need to know from you, okay? So you have total control of your data and how much information you want to release to the world without losing the fact that everybody can trust you. Okay, so this, how to get this balance right is really important, and technology can do that for us. So go back to my example and what we're trying to build now. We're trying to build what is called a data trust, where individuals, right, can give the data to the data trust, and the data trust can aggregate them and then make them available to data consumers. So it doesn't have to be your medical data. It can be, you know, maybe you have a smart meter at home for your electricity, right? And that smart meter creates, you know, knows how much electricity you spend. And this is an important piece of data. If you put it together with another 1,000 people around Harlem or around whatever, New York, you know, and I'm a company that want to understand how people consume electricity and create some interesting innovation around that. I need that data. Right now, I can't get it, okay? So I'll go to the data trust, say, hey, I need that data set, and I'll give, you know, X thousand of dollars to use it, and that's how the money is going to come in. So by introducing this element of free exchange, which is secure, anonymized, you know, and all the rest, I think what we're introducing is a mechanism whereby the data providers, you and me and everybody else, can capture some of the value that is created right now in the digital economy that is not captured. Back to what I said before, you know, we are providing the raw material for those new systems, these AI systems, algorithms that are creating so much wealth, right? But we're not paid for that raw material. Now that raw material is only valuable if we aggregate it. You see, my data just by myself maybe has a little value, but you know, not really. But if I combine it with yours and with Dave's, this is really important, right? Because, you know, whoever is the data scientist can find interesting patterns and, you know, do something interesting. And that is why, and I think that is an important point to make, what the data economy right now, we're all sort of isolated individuals in cyberspace, right? And sometimes we interact through social media, and usually what we do is we shout at each other or we agree with each other, which is pointless because it doesn't really matter. But if we think of data trust, what we're doing is we're moving into a more collective consciousness about the data economy, that working together and pulling things together, we can really make a difference, both to ourselves and our families, but also to the economy at large. It changes completely how we think of ourselves. And I think that's an important point to make, Okay, going back to Dave's argument about the economy, in the current sort of capitalist economy, if you're not working, you're not an asset, you're a liability to society, right? If you're idle, right, so-called idle, like, you know, I'm not doing anything, you're a liability, someone has to give you money. What I'm suggesting here is that the data economy gives us the opportunity to always be an asset, because clearly we always are an asset to the data economy. And that completely changes everything, I think, Stu, in my opinion, right? First of all, it gives us more, everybody dignity and more self-respect, which is really important. You know, people just, you know, it's not about money, it's feeling worthy in society that is important. For most people want to feel worthy, they just don't want a paycheck, okay? And there is research that, you know, correlates unemployment with suicide. It doesn't matter if you get a paycheck. It's important to feel valuable, right? And that's what I'm trying to find ways so we can be valuable in a society and an economy where we're not going to be working all the time, okay? Because jobs will be rare. So how can we be valuable, you know, and worthy and contribute, okay? Not just get a paycheck, right, on welfare. That was the problem I'm trying to solve, if you like.
Oh, that is fascinating, George. Where are you with your pilot, if you don't mind sharing some information about
So right now we have a team. We've you know, we started designing, and we are building what is called a prototype, just to understand, you know, how the system will work, like how it would feel like for data providers, how people will onboard. There's a lot of complexity that we want to push away from people, so people can make it easy, because, you know, words like blockchain and all that, it's all buzzwords, right? People, you know, they don't care about that and they shouldn't care about that. So how we make it easy is what we're working on now, and hopefully, you know, we'll be able to start testing it in, well, maybe 3 months from now we'll start testing it.
Wow, that's fascinating. George, a sidebar, I'd like to have you back again with my UBI team. I have a UBI team. We do a show once a month. And cool. I'd like to have you back and talk about this concept with them. Fascinating.
I'd love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'd love that. Yeah.
Dave, back to you.
Okay, we have a few minutes, and George said something that's interesting. He said AI changed, or the impact of AI changed about 10 years ago. And I know it's a fascinating story about the folks in Canada and other places who came up with new technology and changed what was possible in artificial intelligence. George, have you been following that?
Oh, of course, absolutely. Yeah, I studied artificial intelligence at university. I did my PhD in AI, and, you know, I've been active in the field for over 20 years, and I've lived through the cold winter of AI, which was like in the 90s and early 2000s, right? Where, you know, nothing really interesting was happening. If you walked around and said, I have a PhD in AI, you might as well have had a PhD in astrology. I don't know, something like that, you know, voodoo science, whatever, nobody cared. And then suddenly, you know, guys like Hingston and others, you know, they came up with, you know, those new innovations. There was a lot of other things that were happening at the same time with cloud computing, with graphical processing units. So there was a lot of computing available suddenly, which was not available 20 years ago. It really made a difference. And I think that's important. So it also speaks to the fact how innovation happens, right? You know, innovation happens when many different things come together, really. You know, it's not just invention. You know, someone like Thomas Edison came up with a light bulb moment. It was the right time for AI, if you like, to come to, you know, come on age, right? And become useful. That's what happened. Yeah. Yeah. Really brilliant.
I like to respect the people, the engineers and creators who do these things. Did you know any of the pioneers of this transformation in machine learning?
I haven't met, not personally, but I was, you know, I was following, you know, publications and what was happening in the field, because the ideas that they worked on, the things that we call now neural networks and, you know, all that stuff, those are ideas that, you know, were discussed 60 years ago, right? You know, this idea that we can replicate the human neurons and the human neurological system in a computer, which is what deep learning systems do. That's what they do. They're based on, you know, a concept of the human brain. These were ideas that were 60 years old. It was just not possible 60 years ago, you know, given the computing resources that we had, to build something significant or meaningful. We could only build very small things that didn't really have any practical value. So, Yeah, to your question, Dave, I was just following it from just reading science papers.
Yeah, when you say reading science papers, where did the papers come from?
Well, the scientific journals and engineering journals, like, I don't know, Nature, Science.
What countries were key to the advances that you're thinking of? The reason I'm asking is several of the key people were in Canada, in
Sure,
France.
Toronto. Yeah, in France.
Yeah.
And the States, definitely, yeah. So there was a lot of those countries were key because there was already communities there of researchers, and there was interest in this technology that they didn't let go. And I think it speaks to the stamina of scientific researchers, right? When they keep going when everybody tells them to stop, right? I think that they persevered, and we should be grateful for that.
I should think about having on the show. There's a couple of really extraordinary books on this, including one that I'm thinking of about the growth of this in China. Have you watched how AI is getting developed at Baidu and now at Tencent and Huawei?
Yeah, absolutely. China. Do you know what happened with China and AI? It's a really interesting story, right?
Tell us.
And let me tell you the story because this is really important for your listeners to know, right? Do you remember the time where the Go competition between AlphaGo and Lee Sedol in Seoul happened in, I think it was 2014? Do you know the time where
Sure.
beat Lee Sedol?
Well, I should say to the audience, because they may not know this, it was really a remarkable advance in artificial intelligence. Chess had been cracked. The computers were the world chess champions. But people thought that Go was going to be harder and wasn't ready. But what happened, George?
So what happened was that DeepMind, which is a company, an A company based in London but acquired by Google, developed a system called AlphaGo that beat, one of the top champions of the game Go, right? Now, the game Go, I mean, we in the West, we don't know much about it, but in the East, it's not just a game, right? It's a lot more than that. It's a spiritual journey. It's something that is extremely important in the Oriental culture, and more importantly for China, it's something that the Chinese generals study at military academy. So if you are, a military strategist in China, you train yourself on Go. And the Chinese felt superior to the West because there were such good players at Go. So they thought, okay, the only difference that we have with the West is materiel. I could have better weapons, but we have better soldiers and better generals. So when AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol is what is called the Sputnik moment, like what the Americans felt when Sputnik was up there. Oh shit, right? We need to do something about it. That's how the Chinese felt when AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol. Suddenly, a system that was developed by the West could actually beat them at Go, which was the divine game of the Orient, right? And that really freaked them out. And as a result of that, they decided that they should invest massively in artificial intelligence and become the best at it. That was China's Sputnik moment when it came to artificial intelligence.
Wow.
Right.
And how are they doing?
Fascinating.
If
massively well.
Artificial intelligence, who's ahead? How is it changing?
I think China is moving ahead of the rest of the West, right? And one of the advantages, well, it has a couple of advantages. One is that it controls all the data, right? So in the West is important, and it is important, to talk about data privacy. Privacy is hugely important, right? And it's not just just a word. It's very important for liberty and freedom, and how we relate to government and how we relate to private companies. So privacy is important, but in China, because it's an authoritarian government, it's not important. It's not even discussed, right? It also has to do with Chinese culture as well. They feel they're more community oriented rather than individualistic. So all those things play out. Now, because of that, Chinese companies who are controlled ultimately by the Communist Party, they have access to all the data they want. Okay, and data is what fuels the development of AI algorithms, as we discussed before. And I think that's what makes them very advanced. The other thing that makes them very advanced is that many Chinese students have come and studied at the best universities in America and the West and Europe, and then they went back to China, and they brought back a lot of know-how in China. And the third thing that they've done very cleverly and under the radar is they've acquired some of the best engineers in the West and some of the best companies in the West through acquisitions and
Do you mean that Huawei is hiring artificial intelligence experts in your country? You're in England, right?
Yeah, I'm UK based. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, either directly or through VC, venture capital funds. Yeah, absolutely. There's huge investment in the UK and other countries where Chinese funds, buy up startups. Right? It's been going on for a long time, and it keeps going on. Absolutely. Yeah. So they acquire talent, know-how, and data. Yeah.
About how Huawei in particular is hiring PhDs everywhere they can find them.
There you are.
Istanbul, Russia, hundreds every year in China, and in Cambridge in particular. They have a large group in Cambridge right now doing AI and also doing.
And they've got their own universities as well. I mean, they've made huge advances themselves in creating, fantastic universities. So, they're moving far ahead in many fields, and AI is one of them. Also because they've decided this is an extremely important technology for their survival and growth.
Stu's going to want to call the end of the show in a minute.
Yeah, we could go on and on. This is fascinating stuff. George, it's been great having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay. This has been Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3, The Voice of Harlem, with Stu Reid and Dave Burstein. Special guest today is George Zarkadakis, AI expert and author. Thanks so much to George for joining us. Stay tuned next week for more on community and technology. Good night, guys.